Hi, this is Evelyn Lopez. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear, the Earth911.com podcast for the week of February 24th, 2020. We are almost out of February. Our topics today are plastic, and more plastic, solar recycling, and carbon sequestration.
And unfortunately, there is a lot of plastic out there.
There's a lot of plastic. So welcome. Our publisher of Earth911, Mitch Ratcliffe. Where are you at today?
Well, I'm in beautiful Lakewood, Washington.
Oh, very good. And Earth911 writer, Sarah Lozanova. Sarah, where are you today?
I am in snowy Mid-Coast, Maine.
Is it still very snowy?
Yeah, we just got some snow last night, actually, a few inches.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Well, and I am today not at the beautiful Moonyard Studios in North Tacoma, but I'm down in Olympia at my job, looking out my window at a blue sky that is so welcome after all the rain we've had in Washington. But let's start out by talking about plastic. We have a news story up on the website, and let me just warn you guys, it's not a feel-good.
No, it isn't.
The plastic crisis is here. Mitch, what can you tell us about this?
Yeah, this is a story that we just published, and it is spurred by two events. One was How to Recycle, which is the organization that labels plastic as recyclable, has had to pull its recycling label from plastic. That is, they can no longer label it as recyclable because it is not, plastic recycling is not available to 60% or more of Americans. And that's the requirement in order to say that something is recyclable. So they actually said that they're removing the recyclable label and replacing it with the check locally label, which basically means you need to check our database amongst other things. And they point to our database. To find out whether or not the material is accepted locally. This unfortunately reflects the impact of the Chinese ban a couple of years ago. We had been shipping massive amounts of plastic over to China for processing, and they stopped taking it because so much of it was contaminated. About 21% of it was contaminated, so they were losing money recycling our stuff. As a result, municipal programs have cut back, private programs have cut back, and there is a real crisis, and we're not kidding here, folks, in recycling. When we can no longer say that something as common as plastic is recyclable, we're ignoring the fact that 65% of consumers and 7 in 10 voters are making sustainability a priority. It is simply a matter of we have not valued recyclable materials enough. Now, the other side of this story is actually potentially, it's not a feel-good, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Nestle, which is a company rife with social and environmental issues, did take an important step, and that is they're going to spend up to $2 billion paying a premium for recycled food-grade plastic. So they're going to overpay in order to encourage the development of a more robust plastic recycling system. Mm-hmm. And that's important.
When we've talked about this before, it was always my understanding that one of the major barriers to having more effective recycling was that there was really not much of a market for recycled product. So is this the attempt to sort of jumpstart that market that, hey,
yes,
we really do want to use recycled products. So
yes,
entrepreneurs, please start investing in the creation of, businesses that can effectively recycle and make us that product.
And that is what they're doing. Nestle spends billions of dollars on plastic each year. Generally, plastic, when it's recycled, ends up in clothing or in some form of fiber. And we also know that has resulted in the release of microplastics into the environment virtually every time you wash something. So, companies like Patagonia, which have taken and used recycled plastic to make various types of clothing, are now realizing that they are also contributing to the microplastics problem. So plastic has, it's only recyclable once or twice before it's no longer viable as a material. Unlike something like steel or aluminum, which can be recycled basically forever without losing its capacity to be a useful material. And plastic is something that, food grade, we will use the plastic the first time for a food grade product, something like a #1 bottle for water in Nestle. And then it generally is not reused for food. The question or the opportunity that Nestle is trying to address is to recapture that material for food grade usage. And that's a big step in terms of, getting at least 2 or 3 uses out of that petroleum, which is what plastic is made from, before it is no longer viable. And that's a good thing in terms of our ability to reduce the virgin materials we use for plastic, but we also just need to use a lot less plastic. And that's the next step after this, is rethinking packaging overall so that it can be recaptured. Because that's the problem. We throw this stuff away. It does not get back to the recycler. And that's why there needs to be more money put to use to capture and process that material.
I really applaud Nestle for what they're doing. I think you raise a really good point, though, Mitch, because it's sort of like a plastic issue. You know what I mean? It's kind of like if you have an old car, at what point do you say, I'm going to quit trying to fix it up and just accept that it's kind of a goner, or, like a sinking ship. So I don't, it seems like there are other solutions out there. And maybe it's kind of a both and situation, like let's work on recycling for the short term, but sort of the long term, it doesn't seem like disposable plastics makes sense. And another thing that I just wanted to point out too is with the recycling crisis, there's also a huge issue with paper right now too, because that was another product that we used to send overseas. So it's we're definitely having issues with plastic, but it also impacts the paper market.
Paper and glass, as you'll hear later when we get to Earthling questions, we have some people talking about that. But here's the thing. Since we started making plastic about 75 years ago, we've made 8.3 billion metric tons of this stuff. And some of it has been recycled, about 8%, 8.4%, and another 12% or so has been incinerated to generate power. And those can be incinerated in such a way that they don't release CO2 or other pollutants into the atmosphere, because you can scrub the exhaust. But that means that there's 6.5 billion metric tons of plastic just sitting out there waiting to be captured. And we make another 35.4 million tons of plastic in the United States every year. Now, if you add up that 6.5 billion metric tons that could be recaptured, and at the lowest, like 8 cents a pound kind of rate, we're talking about $6 billion in value out there. And that's just plastic. There's aluminum, there's steel, there's copper, there's all these other materials out there. We live in a big mine of all our old junk. And we have to start mining that instead of mining natural resources to create this stuff. And so that, I think, is the opportunity. And Nestle's investment is a great way to kickstart that. But we need a lot of other companies to join in.
Another really interesting concept, I think, to consider when deciding on what materials to use is kind of the lifespan of that material. And to me, it just seems counterintuitive to make disposable packaging out of something that takes hundreds and hundreds of years to break down. So I think that's kind of one of the flaws with plastic. Like if it's something that you really want to last a long time, I think plastic can make sense. But for disposable food packaging, so much of the plastic that's created each year it's for single use, which seems counterintuitive for something that's so long lasting.
Yeah. Well, it's very difficult to find things that are not plastic, in terms of if you're really trying consciously to shop and, limit your plastics. So, we have some real work to do.
Well, and I think if we were to think in terms of plastic as a thing that has various types of uses and understand which ones are useful and environmentally valuable. I have plastic in my body because I've had a disc replaced in my spine. I don't want that plastic to go away, and I'd like to see more of it so that other people can benefit from the surgery I had. On the other hand, Sarah, your point is dead on. Single-use plastic makes no sense, and we need to move past that in order for plastic to have a reasonable and environmentally responsible role in society.
Yeah. I think some of it is marketing too, because as you mentioned, Mitch, aluminum can be used over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And why don't we have 20-ounce cans of water that are made out of aluminum
and those
instead of
coming.
bottles? Yeah, I think
you can
they'll
see
come.
that. You can see that in many stores now. You're starting to see more aluminum.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a matter of thinking about what we buy in those bottles, in plastic. I mean, when we go and purchase fruit, for instance, and it's wrapped in plastic, that's probably not a good use of plastic. And we should be able to recognize this and send a message back into the supply chain to say, I'll buy the apples, but not the plastic. And if we were listening more carefully and companies were tuned into that consumer feedback, we might actually negotiate a better way of packaging and recycling. The problem with aluminum is that you only get 49% recapture rates here in the United States, compared to in China, it's 88%, and in Brazil, it's 93%. So we have a long way to go to catch up with the EU, which is around 65 to 70%. And then the leaders are way out there. And we can do better. I mean, if they can do it, we can do it.
Well, I think that is actually a good stepping off point to a very interesting infographic that we have up on the website, infographic of Our Plastic Earth. And this is I would say if you were to be able to print this out, it would be like a nice long poster that you could hang up on your door. And it shows the impacts of plastic from the skies down to the deepest depths of the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
And it's significant. And for me, and I think it's very interesting, especially if you've got kids or students, I think they would be fascinated by this. But for me, one of the important things is something that we say early on, which is it's kind of daunting, this idea of how much plastic we've generated and where it is and how pervasive it is. And you kind of almost feel yourself thinking, is it even something that we can do anything about? You feel like, do we just give up? I mean, is it just so messed up? Can we do nothing? And the answer is no, don't give up. Don't give up, because every choice you make every single day has an impact. And, we can slowly clean up the trash that we have, and we can try to not add more into the system. So I would say this is kind of daunting stuff. It's a crisis, but don't give up.
Well, and some of the data in the infographics interesting to think about. I mean, 8 million tons of plastic is washed into the oceans each year, and that's mostly consumer stuff. Brushes and bags and candy wrappers. But then, within the 7 different garbage gyres in the oceans, and I can't believe we actually have garbage gyres. A lot of that is also discarded fishing net and other things. So in the information, it talks in terms of the share of the volume coming from consumer products and the volume overall of fishing gear. Fishing gear accounts for about 60 to 70% of all the waste in the ocean, but those are big pieces of stuff, long nets and things like that. So if you count those 1 and 1 and 1 compared to each consumer item, it looks like consumer items overwhelm the fishing gear, but it's a combination of both. The fishing gear and all of that. But some of the other information in the infographic, like the fact that 50% of the hikers on Mount Everest leave their trash. They should not be on that mountain if they can't take responsibility for taking their trash out. And the Nepalese government has removed 11 tons of litter from Mount Everest in the last year.
I found that actually one of the most surprising little factoids on this, because, I grew up in an outdoorsy family, and we would, if you were hiking above, where there were toilets and things, when you literally pack out everything you pack in, including, used human waste and toilet paper. And so the idea that someone who would be paying as much money as you would pay to go up on Mount Everest and not have that orientation towards, leave nothing behind, I found that astonishing.
And it's true at the other end of the spectrum. At the bottom of the ocean in the Mariana Trench, they're finding garbage. They're bags and plastic wrappers and candy wrappers that are sinking all the way down to 36,000 feet below sea level. And this is just an endemic problem. And it's simply a matter of stopping and thinking before we toss stuff away. Mm-hmm. It has to be handled responsibly. So let's start to recycle more effectively. And maybe Nestle can put some money into specifically targeting ocean-bound plastic. That would be another interesting way for them to both make a better difference and possibly, get some good PR out of it too.
Mm-hmm. I think this study too by Bangor University that found traces of plastic in every British river that was tested, I found that pretty startling too.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around that. Is that like discharge from our washing machines, which has little pieces of microplastic from our clothing, or is that, plastic water bottles breaking down that weren't properly disposed of, or
it's a combination of
or maybe it's all of it.
Yeah, it's all those things. I mean, we have a very wasteful society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Single use. It's why do we need to use something that we throw away immediately after we use it? Humans didn't do that for centuries, millennia.
No. But
I feel like there's so few options. Like when I go to the grocery store, I'm often like, well, I could either not buy bread or I could make it myself maybe in a couple days, or like there's not a lot of no waste options.
I think that's the area.
Free options.
Yeah, I think that's the area that the manufacturers need to target, or the consumers need to demand better options at. Because, one option is I can go back to making a lot of my own things. I can go back to, making bread and doing all kinds of things. I'm making yogurt, things like that. But I don't know that that's realistic for most people. A lot of people are working multiple jobs in order to sort of keep their heads above water.
Yeah.
And our disposable society sort of allows that and fosters that approach, grab something as you go. I really think that it comes down to, we need to demand to have more choices that are better choices than the ones we currently have. Because I agree, Sarah, when I'm looking at something, I actually do make my own yogurt, but I pick up a small container of plain yogurt as the yogurt starter. You can't find one that's not in a little plastic container. And I will recycle that plastic container in my local recycling system, but that's not really the answer either.
But you did hit on something earlier, and that is the fact that people are working in different ways to keep their head above water. Some of those things could be to relocalize food production. So if somebody around your neighborhood did make yogurt and then provide it to you in a reusable container, those are ways that we can start to use the specialization that has allowed humanity to become as advanced as it is, to move back towards sustainable local solutions for food and waste management.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't necessary for everything to come from one company in halfway around the world.
No, that's true. That's
what's so wonderful about farmers markets, is then you get a lot of those different vendors all in one place,
mm-hmm.
and like our farmers market has yogurt and different cheeses, but it has yogurt in glass jars. The thing is, I often don't know what to do with those glass jars when I'm done. So I know other people at the farmers market that like to reuse them, but I think they're not allowed to reuse them commercially. So I often end up kind of finding people that will take egg cartons or, things like that, like a way to reduce, keep that
mm-hmm.
stuff in circulation.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the things I know, I asked our local Tacoma recycling center guy, I had him on a different podcast, and I asked him, well, what happens with the glass? Because the glass processing is changing in Tacoma like it is everywhere. And he said, well, there actually is a glass recycling, it that remakes glass in Seattle. So it's just about trucking the glass up to Seattle, and then it will get remanufactured in Seattle. But I think that's the piece with a lot of this too, is that we have we're completely dependent on shipping our recyclables to China and other locations, and which may have been just a false premise to begin with, but we don't have that actual do the recycling infrastructure here, and now we're faced with this situation where it's sort of like, well, we've got to invest in it or get buried.
Well, and that's what happens when there's a disruption in the supply chain. In this case, China's opted out, and it would take our waste if it was clean, but we don't even clean it well. So it starts with the consumer. We need to be better about separating the material. When we do that, everything works better. The problem is that there is no incentive for participating in this, and that's one of the things I think we're going to start to see over the next few years. Is it isn't necessarily that we'll pay more, but that we'll have more deposits, so that there is money to be collected by people who help keep this going.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we have a little interesting story that we wanted to mention also on reusing 6 ways to reuse plastic bottles. So, and partly I think this is just a fun story with some fun ideas, but it's also that nice reminder of, look at things differently. Look at things that you might have and whether you can reuse them either as food storage or as something else. I know we talked about this once before. Doug mentioned that he takes those really heavy duty cereal bags that come out of the boxes of cereal, and he keeps them and uses them for sandwiches and things like that. And we've started doing that at home. And I got to tell you, those cereal bags, they are virtually indestructible. That is the best storage bag I have ever come across, and we keep reusing those. So look at things with a different eyes, I guess.
Well, so this has some interesting project work, so a woven plastic bottle vase. So you can take a 20-ounce soda bottle, some scissors, and with a little bit of work, create a nice-looking flower vase that can be reused many times. My favorite in this is the do-it-yourself lava lamp in the 2-liter bottle.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to have to try that with my kids. It looks like fun.
And so you need plastic, the bottle, vegetable oil, a funnel, water, food coloring, and Alka-Seltzer.
Isn't that interesting?
Is that to help with the indigestion if you drink some of it by mistake?
Yeah, there you go. I also like the plastic beads that you make with a heat gun. So you just cut strips of colored plastic and then melt them into a bead.
I thought those were really interesting.
All these are great things that you could do with your kids.
And I thought that lampshade with the twisted bottles looked fantastic, but I think it looks quite challenging. So that would be interesting too.
That one boggled my mind.
Yeah, the twisty Mobius lampshade. Yeah, really interesting.
And it is labeled as an advanced project, but each of these has instructions, so you can get in there and figure out what to do with a bunch of things. There's a coin purse, there's a lamp that you can make. It's lots of ways to take that plastic and make it useful for a long time.
I was just going to say, when we first moved to Belfast Co-Housing and Eco Village, one of the things I was excited about is that we actually have single stream recycling, which I know has some downsides, but it has some upsides too. And so we have this huge dumpster in our neighborhood that's full of recycling, and I used to go raid it with my kids, and we'd actually all of my neighbors seem to be very good at cleaning out the recyclables. So we would often, look at what was in there and say like, oh, well, let's make, little decorated plant pots today, or, there's so many. It's kind of amazing all the materials you can find in a recycling bin and all the things that you can make out of them. And if you have access to kind of like a big assortment of them, you can even kind of eye them over and come up with ideas as you see what's available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think especially with kids, this is so important because it's fun, number one, but then you are teaching them to look at the world in a really creative way from early on. So they will always be looking at, hey, I could use that for something, or I could make something out of that. And I think that is really valuable and very important.
Yeah, and I think gardening also teaches that, where they'll see
Mhm.
plants and think of it like, oh, I could put some of these dandelion greens in my salad tonight, instead of just seeing them as weeds or a hindrance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and people don't see the world for what it is. They see it for what they're told it is. With a little bit of research, you can find all sorts of uses that the average folks just ignore.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, Sarah, you had a great story on the state of solar panel recycling, which I think is going to be an interesting challenge over the next 30 years. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, basically, the premise of the article is that solar panels have roughly a 30-year lifespan, and the solar market is going gangbusters, which is great in many ways. But if you think of it from kind of an e-waste perspective, we have this looming problem, this looming issue, and it's something that we really need to address and to create infrastructure for when these solar systems are being decommissioned. And if you think of it kind of on a large scale, like I might have, like my house, for example, has 20 solar panels, and maybe in about 25 years those panels will be decommissioned. But if you think of some of these solar fields, they literally have thousands, tens of thousands of solar panels. So the scale of the waste is really immense. And there's not a cohesive policy, a national policy at least, that deals with this. Although Europe is leading the way in, they have some policies, and they also have dedicated facilities for recycling solar panels.
So you did meet and talk with somebody who is working to build that infrastructure. Tell us about that.
We actually ended up playing a lot of phone tag, but from the research I've done, there's several major kind of key players like SEIA, which is the Solar Energy Industries Association, has compiled a PV working group, and they've identified preferred recycling providers. There's Recycle PV, which offers a national solar panel recycling service, and they're working with PV Cycle to actually help move U.S. panels to recycling facilities in Europe. And then there's a couple solar manufacturers that have their own recycling programs, and those are First Solar and SunPower. So those are some of the real big players right now in solar panel manufacturing here in the U.S.
So at this point, the recycling is mostly happening in Europe because they led the way in putting this in place. Do you see this as an opportunity for people here in the States to start to, like we were talking about before, make some money by thinking about how these very technologically advanced materials can be captured and recycled?
Yeah, and to be honest, I think some of it depends on policies. Like let's say there's a policy in place saying that these panels need to be recycled. I think that would help create more of a market for these products. But solar panels consist largely of glass. It's about 72%. Plus they have plastic, a variety of metals, including things like lead and copper and aluminum, and then they have silicon solar cells. So it is a somewhat tricky process to recycle solar panels. So there definitely are some materials to get out of it, and they're quite bulky, so there's actually quite a bit of material. But I think one way that the solar industry could improve too is to look to design basically for recyclability and to consider that on the front end. And I think a lot of effort's been going into increasing efficiency and boosting energy production when there's shading or cloudy weather. But I think this is a really important consideration. And I think putting more responsibility on the manufacturers helps encourage that kind of thinking on the front end of how to make a more recyclable product.
So how do I know when it's time to recycle a PV panel?
Well, basically, I think one of the premises is that the output of the panels can go down significantly. Like a lot of solar panel manufacturers give what's called a power performance guarantee. So that's basically saying, hey, your solar panels should produce 80% of the output in, for I think 20 years it typically is, or maybe 25 years. So there's a point where there's enough degradation where the solar panels just aren't producing as much power. And then I think it kind of depends on the application, but also if it's, maybe an urban area and space is more sacred, more sought after in urban areas, then I think some of those systems might be decommissioned sooner. Or same thing with some of these big solar fields. If the land is wanting to be used in a different way or to get more energy out of a certain site, those would be times when the systems will be decommissioned. Or also if there's other equipment failure, like the solar panels might be still producing, but it's time to get a new inverter, or the wiring's failing, or other aspects of the system, that might actually be a good time to kind of re-engineer the system. Because in 30 years' time, the efficiency and output of solar panels is just kind of night and day. Like the way that solar panels have advanced is amazing.
Well, it's following the same kind of trajectory that Moore's law did in terms of computational power, because we're really talking about miniaturization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Actually, I think it'll be built into Windows. All of this can be integrated in interesting new ways that we haven't really thought about.
Yeah.
Yeah, even clothing, backpacks. Yeah, it's a very exciting frontier, but it's also evolving, and it's so hard to know exactly where the market's going. Like it'll seem like it's going one way, and then 5 years later you realize that wasn't where it ended up going. So the path is still being forged, and a lot of it depends on kind of where the technology advances and such.
Well, as long as we talk about it, as Mr. Rogers said, if it's mentionable, it's manageable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you got a Mr. Rogers quote in there. There you go.
That's right. You can't go wrong with Mr. Rogers quote. Yeah. Well, the last story we wanted to touch on our website is a story by Gemma Alexander about easy carbon sequestration, things you can do yourself to help out. And one of the things you can do, and one of the things that I think you can do in your community, is talk about trees. And planting trees, revitalizing areas where trees have been cut down, especially where people have cut down trees for views, get smaller trees. But I know this has been an issue in a lot of cities locally, and I think across the country, the downsizing of our tree cover.
Well, and there's a couple of different types of sequestration described in the article, but the important idea here is that we have a lot more CO2 in the atmosphere than we did before the industrial era. It was about 280 parts per million before we started with steam and coal-fired steam engines. Now, 200 years later, it's almost, in fact, I checked, because the data in here is actually last year's data. It's 412 parts per million, and that is the highest concentration of atmospheric CO2 on Earth in 3 million years.
Wow.
That, of course, 2.8 million years before the first Homo sapiens appeared. So we really have done a job. And we have to get that extra carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. One very important way to do this, and this Mark Benioff's A Trillion Trees project is aimed at this as well, is to plant trees. They do, over the full lifetime of a tree, capture a great deal of carbon dioxide and sequester it. That is, put it back into nature, in the ground, into solid form that it's not going to break down. But then there is technology for capturing carbon and putting it back into the ground. Some of it's called geologic carbon sequestration. So they take the CO2, they liquefy it, and they put it back in where we took oil out of the ground. But then all we're doing there is exchanging one form of carbon for another. We're still removing the oil in order to have the carbon to put back. I think the more important thing to do is the biologic, the tree-based approach. Now, there are other ways to take CO2 and turn it into fuel or into cement or in a variety of other things, which we've talked about on the show before. That's very advanced technology that takes a lot of capital investment to make happen. But you can plant a tree and make a difference of 100 pounds, 100 or 1,000 pounds of carbon CO2 over a course of a couple of years as that tree grows, and that's an important difference.
Yeah,
another
really
thing
is.
too to consider is where you plant the tree, because if you for example, if you live in a warm climate and you plant it in a place that would also shade your home, then you're also cutting your energy use for air conditioning. So you're sequestering carbon and helping to reduce energy use. Or if you live in a cold climate, you can also block the winter wind, like more like coniferous type trees, and plant them, in the path of the prevailing winds, which in my case is on the west side of the home. So you can also kind of think strategically on where to plant those trees and have even more impact.
I think that's a good comment. I know I'm looking at adding some more trees to the yard too. And I think if one of the things I like about these stories, and again, sort of echoes what I was saying earlier, is I do feel sometimes that there's a sense of hopelessness and what can we possibly do to fix this horrible situation. And so I always appreciate it when it's sort of well, this is at least something you could do now. You could plant a few more trees, and that would be a very helpful thing to do.
That's one thing that I really like about Earth911 is, we definitely don't shy away from the problems. Some of them, like the article we were discussing on plastics or that infographic, like if you really take it in, it is daunting, but there's so many articles about simple things like, hey, plant a couple trees this weekend, or maybe not this weekend because the ground might be frozen, but a lot of them are relatively simple things, or they might take a couple hours, or just sort of a new mindset when you go shopping. But there's a lot of solutions out there too. And when they're done collectively, they really have an impact.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's why we continue to work on this, even though it seems daunting. There are opportunities to make vast changes, but all of us have to start making small changes as a group. And who's going to do it?
And then that helps.
Yeah, it does help.
And the more that we demand these products, then the more they'll be created, and the more companies will think about sustainability and create products with that in mind, and packaging and all of those things.
And that's a matter of also not accepting what we're given, but asking for what we want. Mm-hmm. Too many companies treat it like, well, we made our decision, now we're just going to force this on folks, and that they need to listen. And people are all over starting to speak up for sustainable options.
All right. Well, those were the articles we wanted to profile today. Before we get to the Earthling questions, Mitch, is there anything else that we should know about? Anything new on the website?
Well, we haven't done an innovator interview in the last couple of weeks because of family illness, but we're going to be going back to those soon. And watch for more interviews coming shortly.
Very good. We'll definitely look for those. Well, let's talk about our Earthling questions then.
Favorite segment of the week.
Favorite segment. So Tina on Facebook says, she says, hello. The company I work for buys a lot of electronics that come in foil-type plastic bags that are marked number 7 and number 11. What can I do with this stuff, and is it recyclable?
Well, so this is actually a couple of different kinds of materials. Number 7 plastic is a catch-all category for advanced plastic. So there's actually about 100 different kinds of plastic that are number 7, which means, of course, they can't all be mixed together and recycled. But if you separate them, for instance, into HDPE, which is the most valuable at about $42 a pound form of plastic, you can recycle plastic number 7. The since you're buying electronics, Tina, the thing that plastic is good at is preventing static buildup, so you don't get a charge that will damage the electronics that the thing is wrapped in. And you mentioned the question about, is number 11 plastic recycled? That actually is not number 11 plastic. It's number 11, which indicates the type of battery that was in the bag, which is it may be kind of confusing. And this is another problem with the way that we label stuff. But it's actually a number 11 battery category, which is misleading. So if you can get those number 7 bags together and get them back to a program that will accept them, and TerraCycle, I believe, has a number 7 plastic program that you can sign up for. That can be recycled. So, but unfortunately, number 7 overall is not widely recycled because it requires a lot more sorting.
Well, and one of the things that we've provided back to Tina is sort of a reference back to the search feature on our website, where you can go into the website and you can ask your question of how to recycle certain things, put in your zip code, and find out where there are recyclers in your local area who will recycle this type of product. And I think that that seems to be one of the most regular things that I see coming up in the Earthling questions, is that type of a where can I question. And so our search tool is a very, very helpful way to get to that.
Well, and this also underscores an important issue with the way we do recycling now. We assume people can take the time to understand the materials something's made from. And we've made efforts to label all those materials. But the fact is, most people don't think in terms of materials. They think in terms of the products they buy and how to recycle the product. You don't buy electronics and think, how do I recycle electronics? You think, how do I recycle this phone from Apple or from Samsung or from Huawei? And what we really need to do is think more about connecting people to solutions for the products they purchase. And that's something that we're working on the site right now. So you'll see product level information, how to recycle specific materials and specific packaging coming soon.
Very good. So Linda in Allentown, Pennsylvania says, I just learned that I can throw my household batteries, such as AA, AAA, Ds, and Cs, in my trash. So I will comment on that next. Where can I go to have my button-sized battery recycled properly? And these little button batteries come out of watches and hearing aids and things like that.
Well, so actually in most locations, you can't put your batteries in the garbage. Sorry to hear that. And you should be recycling those. And you can do the same thing with those batteries as you do with the button-sized batteries, which is take them to Batteries Plus, Best Buy, or Staples. All 3 of those chains will accept recycled batteries. Generally at Best Buy and Staples, there's a collection point either in the front or back near customer service. And at Batteries Plus, you just talk to the people at the desk. Don't throw all this stuff away. Do take it back because it is valuable. One fun fact to know and tell, we have already used about 20 to 25% of the accessible lithium on planet Earth, and we'll probably run through our accessible lithium by 2050. Now, of course, we'll probably find new ways to get lithium, but it'd be a lot better if we recycled all that lithium instead of went and dug up more. So let's put those batteries in there and recycle.
Yes, and that was the point that I was going to make too. In my curbside recycling, we have been able to recycle batteries. We put them into the separate plastic bag, and we put them in with the glass collection. Well, our glass collection is going to go away, and so what we need to do is to take the batteries and bring them, as you say, back to a store that does recycling. Batteries Plus, Best Buy, Staples will all do that, or take them to your recycling center. But it is really important to recycle batteries because they do have materials in them that are very toxic. Even the little batteries you use every day. Do not throw them just into the landfill. That's just a future of toxicity that we can avoid.
Yeah, don't leave garbage and pollution for your grandchildren.
Yeah. Jonna in Charleston asks the perennial question about glass. How can I find out where to recycle my glass? My city does not take glass at all and just suggests putting it in the trash bin. I'll gladly drive it somewhere. I just need to know where to take it.
Well, so Jonna, we exchanged some messages with Jonna about this, and it turns out that she did find places nearby that had previously accepted glass, and they are changing as well. So, as we said, glass is one of these materials that is, at this point, almost worthless from an economic standpoint for recycling, for no good reason other than the fact there's a glut of glass on the market. So instead of processing all that glass, people have bizarrely decided to make more, making it even less valuable. At the same time, we're running short on sand and silica around the world, which is important to making glass. So we're being short-sighted and at the same time trying to rationalize it. Here, what do you do with glass? There are locations all over the country that will accept glass, but they will not necessarily be your recycling program, because as we know, everybody's cutting back. But glass recyclers, if you can find them, will accept glass. You have to sort it by color in order for it to be useful, and you cannot send it through shattered. So if you have a big bag of shattered glass, I don't know who does that, but if you do, you can't, and it's mixed colors, you cannot send it in for recycling. It's much more important to send the bottle or the can or the jar through in its unbroken form so that it can be recycled with other glass of the same color. And that's really the challenge with recycling, is sorting it into those colors. So do check our search engine if you're wondering about glass. Generally, the listings are up to date, but we've seen a recent wave of glass in particular, paper less so, to Sarah's point earlier, being ignored. And right now is a time, if you take the extra effort and do drive it somewhere, it will make a difference.
It will make a difference. And I would add to check back regularly, because right now I think we're in such an area of change with China not accepting the recyclables, with, I would say, probably some development, I hope, or investment in local recycling operations, things that the message you get today saying we don't take that today, next month it might be different. So it's worth doing, continuing to sort of look into this. And it's very frustrating about glass, because glass is recyclable. It's just, it takes a lot more hands-on effort to get it recycled properly.
And take the time, and you start setting the example that others are going to follow. And people constantly, fret and lament the fact they can't make a difference. In fact, you can. Show your friends, show your neighbors that you're doing it. Get out there and just force this problem through. Make people pay attention to it. Yeah,
definitely. Well, all right. So
it wasn't the happiest Earth question.
I would say that's not the most positive. But that is what it is, right? I mean, we have some pretty serious situations with our environment, with our consumer culture, and we're working through them as best we can. And I think it's important for people to realize, there are options. Some options are better than others. Where we find really good options, you've been profiling them on the website. And where there are not great options yet, we need to talk to our suppliers so that we can try to have more things the way we need them.
Let's start talking, and then we can manage it.
Indeed. All right. Well, that is it for this episode of Sustainability in Your Ear. If you have ideas for things you'd like us to cover, or if you've got questions, send us an email, feedback@earth911.com, and you can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and always at the earth911.com website. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.